especially in presence of people that I've looked up to. But I'll use this as an opportunity to repeat what I've heard from my Guru Maharaj, His Holiness Radhanath Swami Maharaj, on a very important day, which is today. That today is the 75th appearance day, according to the Gregorian calendar. And tomorrow also happens to be a very significant date for all Gaudiya Vaishnavas, which is the disappearance day of His Holiness Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakura. So I'll try to narrate whatever I've heard from His Holiness Radhanath Maharaj on glories of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakura, and in that way give my homage and respects to my Guru Maharaj's word. So we'll start with pranam mantras. Om Ajnanatirimandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurom Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadadi Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavamamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatham Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakham Vitamscha Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Presthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Tinamine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Shri Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Namo Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Presthaya Bhutale Srimate Radhanath Swami Tinamine. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So the verse I wanted to share reflections, as I've heard from my Guru Maharaj, was the verse 8th from chapter 14th of 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. And we have often seen that this is more or less the essence in the epitome of spiritual renunciation that we see in a lot of Vaishnavas that we look up to. So the background of this verse is that Brahma Vimohan Leela has just happened, and Brahma is now surrendering to Lord Shri Krishna, and he is revealing his heart to Krishna. So the verse goes like Tatate nukamam su samikshna samano bhunjana evatma kritam vipakam ridvak vapurbhir vidadhan namaste jiveta yo mukti pade sadayabhak. We can repeat the synonyms. Tat, therefore, te, your, anukampam, compassion, su samiksh samana, earnestly hoping for, bhunjana, enduring, eva, certainly, atma kritam, done by himself, vipakam, the fruitative act results, rit, in his heart, vak, words, vapurbhi, and body, vidhadan, offering, namaha, obeisances, te, unto you, Jiveta, lives, yah, anyone who mukti pade to the position of liberation, sah he dayabhak, the rightful heir. The translation: My dear Lord, one who earnestly waits for you to bestow your causeless mercy upon him, all the while patiently suffering the reactions of his past misdeeds and offering you respectful obeisances with his heart, words, and body, is surely eligible for liberation, for it has become his rightful claim. Purport by Srila Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Purport. Srila Sridhar Swami explains in his commentary that just a legitimate son has to simply remain alive to gain an inheritance from his father. One who simply remains alive in Krishna consciousness, following the regulative principles of Bhakti Yoga, automatically becomes eligible to receive the mercy of the personality of Godhead. In other words, he will be promoted to the kingdom of God. The word Su Samana indicates that a devotee earnestly awaits the mercy of Supreme Lord even while suffering the painful effects of previous sinful lives. Lord Krishna explains in Bhagavad Gita that a devotee who fully surrenders unto him is no longer liable to suffer the reactions of his previous karmas. However, because in his mind a devotee may still maintain the remnants of previous sinful mentality, the Lord removes the last vestiges of the enjoying spirit by giving his devotee punishments that may sometimes resemble sinful reactions. The purpose of the entire creation of God is to rectify the living entity's tendency to enjoy without the Lord, and therefore the particular punishment given for a sinful activity is specifically designated to curtail the mentality that produced the activity. Although a devotee has surrendered to Lord's devotional service, until he is completely perfect in Krishna consciousness, he may maintain a slight inclination to enjoy the false happiness of this world. The Lord, therefore, creates a particular situation to eradicate this remaining enjoying spirit. The unhappiness suffered by a sincere devotee is not technically a karmic reaction. It's rather the Lord's special mercy for inducing his devotee to completely let go of the material world and return home back to Godhead. A sincere devotee earnestly desires to go back to Lord's abode. Therefore, he willingly accepts the Lord's merciful punishment and continues offering respects and obeisances to his Lord with his heart, words, and body. Such a bona fide servant of the Lord, considering all hardships a small price to pay for gaining the personal association of Lord, certainly becomes a legitimate son of God, as indicated here by the words Dayabhak. Just as one cannot approach the sun without becoming fire, one cannot approach the supreme, pure Lord Krishna without undergoing a rigid purificatory process, which may appear like suffering, but which is in fact a curative treatment administered by the personal hand of Lord. Jai Srila Prabhupada. So, as I mentioned before, tomorrow happens to be the disappearance day of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakura, and today happens to be the appearance day of my Guru Maharaj, His Holiness Radhanath Swami Maharaj, according to the Christian calendar. So I'll try to go over the essence of this verse based on a lecture given by His Holiness Radhanath Swami Maharaj on the disappearance day of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakura during Rameshwaram Yatra in the year 2012. And why does this lecture correlate so much to the essence that we saw in the previous verse? Is because while Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakura was disappearing from this world, he brought all his disciples together and he gave this 6 final instructions. And if we carefully see and try to understand these 6 final instructions, we'll see that they are so closely related to the essence and the meaning of the verse that we just went through. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's instructions, they basically call the real Vaishnava behavior, which all the previous acharyas in our tradition have exhibited so profoundly. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur mentioned about working together, avoiding quarrel, persevering through difficulties, not allowing any sort of disappointment to affect us, and always, always holding on to the holy name and being more humble than a blade of grass. And as we know in the previous verse, Krishna tells us in the 10th canto that a devotee with all circumstances patiently tolerates all the sufferings that come his way, either because of Krishna's own testing or because of his past karmic reactions. Everything becomes nullified, and then he has basically gained a place in the spiritual world. So we'll try to go over the 6 major instructions that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur gave to his disciples as he was leaving his this material world. As I mentioned before, this is from His Holiness Radhanath Maharaj's class that he gave on Rameshwaram Yatra in 2012. So for all of us who know about Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, we know he was the son of Bhakti Vinod Thakur, and he was born in 1874 as Bimal Prasad in the holy town of Puri. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati didn't appear just like that. Bhakti Vinod Thakur had long prayed to get an illustrious son who would basically take the flag of Gaudiya Dharma all around. And his prayers were answered when Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur appeared in 1874. And whenever great souls or great devotees appear, there are always certain, signs around. Just as when Duryodhan was born, there were inauspicious signs. The dogs, the jackals, the foxes were howling, owls came out, and so on. Similarly, when Vaishnavas or great devotees are born, there are a lot of auspicious signs. In case of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, what happened was his birth coincided with the famous Rath Yatra festival in Puri, and Lord Jagannath's Rath, it halted for 3 full days outside their home, which is on Bada Danda, right along the path where Jagannath Rath Yatra happens in Puri. And when his mother brought him as a baby on Jagannath's Rath, the baby received a garland directly from one of the pandas who was on the Rath, signifying that, there was more to come for the special baby. And he exhibited extraordinary scholarship as a young child. Memorized the entire Gita by the age of 7, was already writing his own commentaries on several important aspects of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, and he basically assisted his father in restoring the pure teachings of Lord Chaitanya, which over the period of 400 years had basically started to being misinterpreted. A lot of malpractices had crept in, and Gaudiya community had been split up by a lot of casteism that was prevalent in the Bengali society at that time. And he took to himself his father's mission, which was to get pure mercy of Lord Chaitanya and to restore the true glory of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. And after disappearance of his father in the year 1914 and his own guru, Srila Gaur Kishordas Babaji in 1915, he vowed to chant 1 billion names of Lord Krishna in Mayapur, and he started living literally as a sadhu. And in 1918, meditating in front of the photo of his guru, he accepted sannyas and began one of the greatest spiritual reform movements in Indian history. And he, as a part of this movement, he started Sri Chaitanya Mutt and later the Gaudiya Mutt, establishing 64 centers all over India. He started printing presses, he started libraries, periodicals, and started sending his preachers, students that he had trained all over Europe so that they could promote Vaishnavism. And he was extremely humble, but when it came to defending Sri Chaitanya or Gaudiya Vaishnavism, he was extremely profound and he used to not shy away from challenges. And that's the reason why Prabhupada often called him Simha Guru, or Guru who roars the message of Lord Chaitanya. He was philosophically so profound that he was practically undefeatable. And he was spiritually uncompromising, very stern, but at the same time he was deeply compassionate to everybody. And we can see this quality of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati when Prabhupada met him for the very first time on the rooftop of a place in Kolkata that his friend had taken him to see. And as soon as he saw Prabhupada coming, he told him that, you're an educated young person, why don't you take the message of Lord Chaitanya to West? And we see that in later stages of life and throughout his life even, Prabhupada imbibed this teaching of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati deeply within his heart and executed that. And in 1937, when in Kolkata in the Bagh Bazaar Gaudiya Mutt, when it became apparent that, he will be leaving this material world soon, he basically called all his disciples together and gave them a certain set of instructions which will now go over, which imbibe the learnings from the verse in Srimad Bhagavatam that we just went through. And coming to the last instructions of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. So the first instruction that he gave to his disciples was, work conjointly under the spiritual master, serve the absolute truth. And he emphasized the essence that to serve the spiritual master was to be together. And he emphasized the importance that unity is something that will ensure success for each and everyone's spiritual sadhana as well as growth of the movement. And as we go through these instructions, we'll come to realize that Srila Prabhupada imbibed each and every instruction that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakura gave on his deathbed so deeply within his heart that we see Prabhupada executing this over and over again. So, Srila Prabhupada, when he was leaving the world from Vrindavan, he told his disciples the same thing, that you can show your love for me by how you cooperate. And when I see the life of my own Guru Maharaj, I see that how he has tried to live this instruction from Prabhupada so closely within his heart. ISKCON has gone through so many challenges over a period of years, and yet Maharaj has always been somebody who brings people together. As we had his Vyas Puja ceremony yesterday at CNJ, there were so many devotees who mentioned that Maharaj has so much of Krishna within him that he shares it very freely. And when he's sharing it freely with everyone, it doesn't matter who the person is. It could be a politician, it could be a celebrity, it could be a simple child, it could be somebody who is in the higher places, in the C-listers, in other words. He is very openly able to share the message of Krishna and his love for Krishna with everybody. And he is able to bring everybody together. And we see this happening so many times in the projects that Maharaj has very closely worked in, like Govardhan Eco Village or ISKCON Chowpatty, where so many amazing devotees have come out of that venture. So this is something that we all can learn from, is that our strength lies in our unity. We'll often feel challenges, we often feel disagreements, but the goal should be pleasing Krishna and being together for Krishna. And we see this so many times in life of Srila Prabhupada. When Srila Prabhupada was an elderly person, he was struggling with his finances. He barely had any money to print Back to Godhead. He still struggled and continued the publication on. He was traveling, in trains at his advanced age, struggling to gather funds, but he made sure that he followed the instruction that his Guru Maharaj had given, that, Abhay, if you ever get money, print books. So Srila Prabhupada kept this instruction very closely to his heart. And the direct meaning of this instruction of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati is that we always put Krishna and Guru's instruction at the center and not our ego. So all of us have our egos, but we should rise above our personal preferences, our opinions, our insecurities, and we serve together with a common purpose. And when we see great lives like Srila Prabhupada or even His Holiness Radhanath Maharaj, we see this happening so many times, that in spite of the challenges that they faced, they placed their Guru's instructions at the center, and we see the success that they had in making so many souls come to Krishna consciousness. The second instruction that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakura gave to his disciples is very important. It's very profound too, no matter how simple it seems. Somehow live without quarrel. In this material world, what to speak of, greater organizations, but in our own homes also we have, disagreements amongst our siblings or with our spouses or with our greater extended family. It's very difficult to not have these kind of issues. But the instruction that he gave to his disciples was that somehow live without quarrel. So he knew it was more of like a prophecy in coming, that you will encounter a situation where there will be quarrels, but stick together. And he repeated this strongly. And we all know that quarrel arises when false ego becomes the center, and harmony arises when Krishna becomes the center. If we see the Brajbasis in Krishna Leela, their center was always Krishna. No matter what happens, they will always approach Krishna. After the whole Kaliya Leela happened and they were gathered on the banks of Yamuna river, and there was this blaze which was seemingly going to eat away, the entire forest and the banks, the thing that they did was they approached Krishna. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakura warned that the internal conflict is like the forest fire at Kaliya Ghat. It can burn the entire mission unless devotees take shelter and cooperate. And we see that every time that devotees have gotten together, they have been able to achieve amazing feats. Like all the amazing temples that we have seen, all across the world, it's just because there have been devotees who have been working towards a mission. In our own case also, we are seeing amazing progress happening on our Parsipani project because devotees are working so closely together. The third point that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakura mentioned was, do not give up your service despite all danger, criticism and discomfort. So discomfort, criticism and danger, these are the characteristics of what we all face with our challenges in this material world, right? But the essence is to do it regardless. Like all the people who have achieved great things in this world, be it spiritual or material, nothing has come out of living their life in the safety of not exceeding their inhibitions. Sports person, do it regardless. Like I was hearing to one of the interviews of Michael Phelps, and he was saying that for 15 odd years, he was practicing practically every day, even when he was sick. And that's like discipline. And we see that even amongst devotees, there are devotees who basically follow a very
military regime kind of, lifestyle with their own sadhana. And it is something to be really inspired and learn from. So a disciple proves love not by convenience but by perseverance. Somebody who continues to do something for the sake of his Guru Maharaj. In case of Srila Prabhupada, even at the age of 70, he was doing what his Guru Maharaj had asked to. Even when he came to West, where he practically knew nobody, and he was amongst hippies who were druggists, alcoholics, and so on, he continued with his mission of, attempting to revive the movement that had a legacy of thousands of years. And every great devotee in scripture advanced through difficulties. We all know this, that Prahlad, Dhruv, Amrish Maharaj, Gajendra, and Pandavas. They went through so much of sufferings, but they did not lose their focus or their devotion towards the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He wanted devotees who would never abandon their service no matter what came. And we see this even with Srila Prabhupada. His devotees, his disciples were so dedicated to their service, doing book distributions, spreading the holy name, building temples. So what defines true dedication is somebody who is able to stick up with their service towards the Supreme no matter what. And we see this so profoundly in case of the Pandavas. The Pandavas went through hell, literally. Like everything was stripped from them. Their royal titles, their regalia, their wife was insulted in front of an assembly. Innumerable attempts were made, at their life, and yet they never gave up on Krishna. It is so difficult. When I try to place myself in their shoes, I find it so difficult to have still that much faith. And it's not that, in the battlefield of Kurukshetra also it was a cakewalk. They still had to fight. They had to fight with their uncles. They had to kill their uncles. They had to attack, and destroy hundreds and thousands of soldiers. They had to fire arrows at their gurus, at their grandfathers, at somebody who were younger than them, sons of their cousins. And yet they did it because they wanted to please Krishna. So this is something that is very important. It's difficult, but it's very important to imbibe, is that do not give up your service despite all danger, criticism, and discomfort. The fourth point that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakura mentioned was do not be disappointed. It's very important that we do not lose the enthusiasm. All of us have experienced the ups and downs in material life, but the essence is to not lose the enthusiasm. So preach whether the hall is full or empty, even if the four walls are listening, Krishna and Parampara are pleased. This is what Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakura meant, that even if you do not have anybody listening to you, you still preach, because this is an opportunity for you to glorify the holy name of Krishna. Even if there is nobody around, it will still go into the greater environs, and the holy name of Krishna will still be there. And we see this happening so many times with Prabhupada. Like devotees have taken big halls, and people have not showed up. Even when Prabhupada started 26 2nd Avenue, in the beginning there were so few people coming in. And yet he did not lose his enthusiasm. He did not lose his enthusiasm for writing. He did not lose his enthusiasm for publishing. And what are the odds? Like, think about it. A 70-year-old person, they go through so much of health problems. My mom is 70 and I can see, the health issues. I cannot even imagine a person at the age of 70 coming to a land that he has never been before. In middle of fall, live through the winter, struggle around, and yet, continue his dedication. That is unparalleled. It has never happened in the annals of history. So this is what we learn, like, Srila Prabhupada imbibing this very strongly, that do not be disappointed. The holy name of Krishna is all powerful. It will always ensure that, it reaches the place where it's supposed to reach. And a preacher's success is measured by sincerity and not numbers. And Srila Prabhupada, in his earliest days, he exhibited this so well. Like, we see him a few years back, there was an amazing documentary that had come out on Prabhupada, the Hare Krishna movie, if you have seen. And there were quite some pictures from Srila Prabhupada's earliest day. And those were so emotional pictures, because you see Prabhupada as an elderly person walking alone on streets of Manhattan in middle of winter. And yet his faith in Krishna is still deep, He has not lost courage. He is like a Kshatriya, literally his head is up. He's walking with, he exhibits that same Simha Guru, attitude that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakura had, that the holy name is here to stay. It is not going anywhere. And we know the history. We know what happened next. Thousands and thousands of disciples were made, and, in annals of history, we have not seen the Gaudiya Dharma or, Vaishnavism spreading so profoundly all over the world. The prophecy that Lord Chaitanya had made, that the holy name of Krishna will reach every town and village, Prabhupada saw that happen. The fifth point that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakura mentioned was, always chant the holy name and never let go. Hold on to holy name like a person clinging to wine after falling for cliff with your life. And whatever we are facing, failure, pressure, disease, insults, or temptation, do not let go of the holy name. This was his plea. He insisted his disciples to hold on to the holy name, because the holy name is non-different than Krishna. So when you are reaching out to the holy name, you are in constant connection with Krishna. And if you are in connection with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, there is no possibility of you falling into darkness. The tagline of Back to Godhead magazine is, where there is Godhead, where there is God, there is no darkness, right? Because Krishna is the source of all light. So wherever you are facing Krishna, when you're looking towards the sun, you never see your shadow. So similarly, whenever you are in touch with the holy name, you are always protected. Your faith is always protected. And I cannot find a more profound example to this than Prahlad Maharaj, a 5-year-old child, having such a strong faith in the holy name, suffering innumerable tortures at the hands of his own father. And yet, the holy name of Vasudev, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, never left his lips. So that is a deep learning that we can all imbibe, that no matter what happens, we continue chanting the holy name of Krishna. And the last one, and this is something that I have seen Guru Maharaj repeat over and over again, was be more humble than a blade of grass, more tolerant than a tree, offer all respect to others and expect none for yourself. Trinad api sunichena taror api sahishnuna amani manadena kirtaniya sadahari. Kirtaniya sadahari. We can do kirtan of Lord Sada, always, only with this mindset. I've personally experienced that anytime I feel pride or bit of arrogance or, think too much of myself, my chanting is immediately affected. So it is extremely important that we always, if not imbibe, at least work towards imbibing this thought in our mind. Guru Maharaj often keeps on repeating this verse because this is the essence of the philosophy of Lord Chaitanya. And we see this particular thought imbibed so closely by some of his closest disciples, like the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan. Srila Rupa Sanatan Goswami, they were like the topmost ministers in the court of Hussain Shah of Bengal. And Bengal at that time, if you look up into history, was one of the most richest province. The GDP of Bengal would have been closely to GDP of a few European countries together. It was that rich. And these guys were like Sundar Pichai and, CEOs, CFOs. So they were making a hell lot of money. And yet, when it came to renouncing it for the sake of Lord Chaitanya's instructions, they did that without any hesitation. Now, I'm not saying that we, try to walk in their footsteps. It's practically not possible for all of us to just blindly imitate that. But there is so much for us to learn from these examples, that in spite of being so materially successful, they were able to retain that humility, that they were sleeping under trees in Vrindavan when they were doing the mission of Lord Chaitanya, of discovering all these pastimes and the places of the pastimes and all these deities carved by Brajanab 5,000 years back. So it is extremely important that we hold on to our humility. In yesterday's Vyas Puja at CNJ, some devotees had consolidated a nice snippet of Guru Maharaj's interactions with all his god brothers. And a lot of faces were teary after that, because we see him being humble and loving to practically everybody that he's encountering. So that is something that, we as disciples of all these great souls, we can aspire for. This was the final emphasis echoing Shishtastakam, and he said, we have no other desire. And after this, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakura ended his earthly pastimes. So going over a recap of the 6 points is perseverance despite obstacles, and in the verse that we saw, patiently suffers the reactions of his past misdeeds. So it's important that we don't give up on our service despite criticism, discomfort, and danger. Second point, we have to be united. Unity and cooperation in the Guru and Krishna. So offers you heartfelt obeisances with his body, mind, and words. This is what we saw in the verse, right? So all members offer themselves together in total surrender. That's the essence. The third one was humility and tolerance. This verse is a classic commentary on true humility and patience, enduring trials without complaint. We see this happening in lives of great souls, great saints. They always went through trials and complaint. It was not that all these great saints were born, they were all saints, they did their Krishna consciousness and they went back to Godhead. We see all the saints went through so much of trials, so much of tribulations, right? But they continued to do whatever they were doing on the path of bhakti, and they endured all the trials without any complaints. The fourth point was, never be disappointed. Success is measured by sincerity. The devotee hopes for causeless mercy, not for material results or applause. The fifth point was holding on to holy name. Never lose faith in holy name. This verse is often quoted in context of trials and devotional service, where chanting, prayers, and service are means of survival. And we see this in case of all the great Vaishnavas, that they held on to holy name. They never let go of holy name. Be it somebody like Prahlad Maharaj, or be it somebody like Haridas Thakur, who was flogged publicly in multiple bazaars by the soldiers. And the last one is the mood of Trinadapi Sunichena, more humble than a blade of grass. This verse is practically an expression of pure humility and surrender, as later restated by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So in the verse we saw that the devotee who is extremely humble and suffering the trials which are put forth by Krishna, out of his own mercy, Krishna says, when I feel specifically merciful on anybody, I just take away all his floggings. So that happens in case of very pure souls who Krishna wants to personally test and make them rise more on the path of bhakti. So the mood of Trinadapi Sunichena is so important for all of us. So if all these 6 points are too much to remember, there were three major takeaways that I felt are the essence of this verse and also the last instructions of Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakura, and also what I've heard from His Holiness Radhanath Maharaj and from his life, is that we have to put Krishna in the center of all relationships. If Krishna is in the center, then automatically all the problems just melt away. The second one, cooperate to serve Guru and Vaishnavas. If we cooperate together to serve Guru, to serve Vaishnavas, unity, success is guaranteed. We see this happening over and over again with all the acharyas, with gurus in our own tradition, and in the world as well. Cooperation is the key. And the last one, chant the holy names with humility and determination. There is no refuge but the holy name. We see this from our acharyas every time. So I'll end today's small discussion on the upcoming disappearance day of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, with the thought that, from his instructions, we see that he's calling us for unity, humility, steadfast service, and wholehearted chanting, because that's the key for us to improve ourselves in the path of bhakti. And on the glorious appearance day of His Holiness Radhanath Maharaj, I learned from him how he exemplifies to live with the very instructions that we saw from lives of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakura and Srila Prabhupada, with gratitude, with compassion, and with cooperation. So gratitude, compassion, cooperation, and unflinching faith in the holy name. So thank you very much for the opportunity. Aprameya Krishna Prabhu. Please forgive me for any mistakes. And if you have any questions, comments, please let me know.
You wonderfully explained all the teachings from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati and how you connected. So I can see that. Maybe one of the most important point which I kind of noticed, or which is how we can avoid quarrels. Right, this is a time of hypocrisy and quarrel. This age, and somehow Bhaktisiddhanta somehow live without quarrel. That was the instruction by Bhaktisiddhanta, and one of the three takeaway, it showed up on the first one, that keeping a Krishna in the center, that's the only way.
Yeah.
There is no other way. So it's kind of really touching, heart-touching to me.
Yeah. Because, from whatever limited intelligence I have, I've seen that, at least in the case of Rajavasis, is that they had their own rasas, but the goal was Krishna. Right? Even in the case of, in Ramayana we see, when they wanted, the penultimate goal of all the Vanar Sena was to unite Sri Ram and Mata Sita. And they did whatever they could in their own capacity, and they were not treading each other's paths, because the goal was, building that bridge between Sri Ram and Ma Sita. So I think if the goal, as you mentioned, Prabhu, is always Krishna, then the things just melt away. Because then we are able to tolerate any differences which we may have with other person, because the other person is also trying to please Krishna in his own capacity, in his own nature, and with his own love. So, yep. Thank you very much. Thank you, Aprameya Krishna Prabhu, for the opportunity. Yeah. Thank you, Prabhu. Srila Prabhupada ki, His Holiness Radhanath Swami Maharaj ki, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur ki. Jai. Yes.
So this one thing which in the purport and also in your explanation said about causeless mercy and the suffering for the past days, right?
Past mistakes. Yeah.
Past mistakes. So when
Yeah.
And when you are suffering, you say it is a causeless mercy. So how do the elevated soul reconcile between these two things?
I mean, like, I'm not that level yet. But what I can see from the lives of great Vaishnavas is that they always treat that as causeless mercy, because they are beyond that understanding that they are that much on the level and so intimate with Krishna in their dealings that anything that's coming their way, they treat that as causeless mercy. They do not think of it as any challenges or any sort of like purification. They just welcome it with their with both their hands. Like in case of Srila Rupa and Sanatan Goswami, when they were living in Vrindavan, they were like hardly able to eat you know complicated preparations. Like in case of Sanatan Goswami, he was making batis, right, when and feeding them to Madan Mohan. So he was not questioning ki I was living like a king in Bengal and now eating this half baked batis. He was just welcoming whatever came his way. So I think, as at least from the life of these elevated souls, is that as they grow, as we grow slowly on the path of Krishna consciousness, we come to accept that it's either our past misdeeds or it's coming as a causeless mercy. How we take it, it's totally dependent on us.
So in a way, we have to take it as a causeless mercy.
Maybe Prabhuji. Yeah, please, Prabhu.
No, just one realization. Someone passed on this verse. They ended this class with a very short phrase which stays with me. It says, it's summarized within me here. It says, take the blame, chant the name, taste the bread.
Prema, or taste the prema.
Take the blame, chant the name, taste the prem. Yeah, there. Thank you so much, Prabhu. Yeah, it was amazing way to conclude this. Yeah.
Another way to look at the adversity of the life is that maybe I would be in a worse condition than this. Right? We always say that, okay, because of my past deed, I would have lost my hand. But I was just cutting vegetables in a kitchen, and there was just a cut happen in my finger, and resolve the karma. So I would be in a very bad situation, but because of Krishna's mercy, I was been saved from that whatever was condition, and then he minimized the effect of my heinous karma which I did in past. But whatever happened in the devotee's life, generally we said that whatever happened in the devotee life, they see it as a Krishna's mercy. They don't see, because whatever things come upon themselves, they see that, okay, this is the life of the, this is how Krishna wants me to be, and this is Krishna's plan.
Instead of taking it as like karma, it's like how you're shaping your heart, right? Transformation.
Thank you so much. Very good.
But you were seeing me yesterday? No. We're going to sing, Prabhu. You want to sing? Huh? No one is there. Okay. Okay. Sing.
Narasimha appeared yesterday, but not in this. I think I was like half awake that day. No, I'm okay. You are going to play the mridanga? You want to play the mridanga?
Yeah, I'll play.
Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada.
Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada.
Sri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhakti Sadma. Mando mui savadhan mate. Yahara prasade bhai e bhavatoriya jai. Krishna prapti hoy jaha hoy te. Guru mukha padma vakya chitite toriya kya. Arana kori ho mane asha. Sri Guru charane rati aise uttama gati. Sri Guru charane rati aise uttama gati. ये प्रसादे पूरे सर्व आशा. चक्कू दान दिलो जय जल में प्रभु से. लो जय जल में प्रभु से. दिव्य ज्ञान हृदय प्रकाशितो. प्रेम भक्ति जहाँ होते अविद्या विनाशा जाते. जहाँ होते अविद्या विनाशा जाते. वेदे गाय जहारा चरितो. वेदे गाय जहारा चरितो. श्री गुरु करुणा सिंधु अधम जनारा बंधु. करुणा सिंधु अधम जनारा बंधु. श्री गुरु करुणा सिंधु अधम जनारा बंधु. गुरु करुणा सिंधु लोकनाथ लोकेरा जीवाना. हाथ लोकेरा जीवाना. प्रभु करो दोया देह मोरी पड़ छाया. प्रभु देह मोरी पड़ छाया, आहा प्रभु करो दोया, देह मोरी पड़ छाया, आहा प्रभु करो दोया, देह मोरी पड़ छाया, इबेजाज गिशुक त्रिभुवाना, इबेजाज गिशुक त्रिभुवाना, प्रभुपाद पतित पवाना, प्रभुपाद पतित पवाना, जय प्रभुपदा, जय प्रभुपदा, जय प्रभुपदा, जय प्रभुपदा, जय प्रभु, जय जय प्रभुपाद, 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 जय जय प्रभुपाद, नमो विष्णुपदाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामिन् इति नामिने नमो विष्णुपदाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामिन् इति नामिने नमस्ते सरस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेषा शून्यवादी पाश्चात देशतारिणे नमस्ते सरस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेषा शून्यवादी पाश्चात देशतारिणे जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद हरे कृष्ण कृष्ण कृष्ण